eye care program. 35 years of alcohol, drug abuse, and violence prevention. Serving the East Baton Rouge Parish community since 1981.
Underage drinking is a very serious issue in East Baton Rouge Parish. Many of the students in our public, private, and parochial schools are consuming alcohol in alarmingly high quantities and at equally alarming frequencies. On average, our students first consume alcohol at the age of 11 and a half years. For many, alcohol consumption has gone well beyond the occasional rite of passage levels their parents may have experienced. Because alcohol is a neurotoxic chemical, its consumption by our students is not only affecting their academic performance, but also their social behavior. It is an issue that cuts across all socioeconomic boundaries and, all too often, leads to chemical dependency. In many instances, that dependency manifests itself well before these students finish high school. The Eye Care program, which operates as a school-based program of the East Baton Rouge Parish School System, is addressing this issue with students. The Eye Care Advisory Council has produced the following program in an effort to inform parents and the community about the issue, with emphasis on the importance of the parental role in the partnership between parents, schools, and the community.
I want to welcome you to this very important discussion about underage drinking in our community. My name is Kathy Childers, and I'm a member of the Eye Care Advisory Council. I'm joined today by 4 people with great knowledge about this topic, and they're here to share their knowledge with you, the parents of our young people. On my far right is Dr. Louis Cataldi. Dr. Cataldi is the former East Baton Rouge Parish coroner. He is also board certified in addiction medicine. To my immediate right is Donna Tate. Donna is the State Executive Director of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. To my immediate left is Mr. Gwen Shamlin. Gwen is a member of the Eye Care staff, and he works with educators and students in schools across the parish. And to my far left is Judge William Morvant. Judge Morvant holds a seat on the 19th Judicial District Court and has heard both criminal and civil cases during his tenure on the bench. I'm serving as the moderator, so let's begin. Let me first ask of you, Mr. Shamlin, how big is the underage drinking problem in our community?
Well, in measuring this problem and looking at it, you know, our program is a school-based program, and so we work directly with young people. We're able to survey them every 2 years with something called the Caring Communities Youth Survey. And that gives us information on behaviors, perceptions, and not just with the student, but with their families, with the community, with the school as well. And what we find is that through that survey, we discovered that the average age of onset, which is the average age of first use, is about 11 and a half years, which is well below the legal drinking age. We also find that with our 10th and 12th graders, with 12th graders, a little under 50% of them indicate drinking regularly, a little over 30% of our 10th graders. So it is a concern within our parish.
How could an 11, 12-year-old get alcohol?
Well, in terms of where they're getting it, again, and our survey results are very interesting. We find that in many cases, our young people are getting it at home. Sometimes from parents who are well-intentioned, sometimes from parents who are unaware of what's going on. But the first line of defense and prevention we find is working in the home. And if we can get parents to be more vigilant with monitoring their kids and watching what their kids are doing, we can put a dent in the problem.
I think as parents, we assume the problem is when they go out at night when they're much older. But what you're saying is they're starting very young as preteens. And
Yeah.
are they doing this during the afternoons when
Yeah.
the parents are at work?
Many of the indicators tell us that they're doing it after 4 o'clock, after 4:30 in the evenings. A lot of times when they get home, before their parents get home, when there is probably the least amount of monitoring. And also when they visit their friends' homes, where they may not be monitoring as well, where their parent may feel that they know what's going on, but again, the child may not be with them. So again, looking at what goes on in the home would be our first step in doing effective prevention. So
you mentioned obviously 12 and 13-year-olds are underage. Judge Morvant, what exactly is the legal drinking age? Because I've heard it's different for driving versus drinking in a residence, and I hear 18, 21. It's very confusing for parents.
The legal drinking age in this state is 21.
And does that apply for drinking in the home?
No, for drinking in the home, if a child is accompanied by their parent, legal guardian, or spouse, and the legal guardian and or spouse have to be over 21, 18 to 20-year-olds can drink, but it would require the knowledge, the consent, and the presence of that parent, spouse, or legal guardian. Absent that, it's mandatory 21.
But if I'm a parent of an 18-year-old and it's graduation, and I want to have a party at my home for my child and his or her friends, what if I talk to the other parents and I explain to them, I want it to be controlled, I'm not going to let anyone binge drink or drive after they've drunk alcohol. Is there a problem? What would be the problem with that if I've cleared it with the parents ahead of time?
The problem is it's a non-delegable responsibility. The law is very clear that as a parent, you can give the consent, you can be there, be present while your son or daughter, who is between 18 and 20, drinks, but you cannot do that for another child. That child's parent has to be present. And in fact, East Baton Rouge Parish has an even more specific ordinance that applies to underage drinking. It specifically says 18, 19, 20-year-olds can only possess or consume alcohol in the presence, with the knowledge and the consent of their parent. So what that does, the situations where a parent may be upstairs in the house, physically within the confines of the home, and children are drinking, even your own child, that's not compliance with the statute, because that parent has to be there, has to be present, has to have knowledge of it, you can't do it behind their back, and have to have consented. And you can only do that for your own child. So I couldn't send my child to your house and say, Kathy, it's okay for him to drink. He's 19, I'm giving you permission. You don't have that privy to allow my child to do it. I can't delegate that function to you, because if we do that, we're both breaking the law.
So I can only give alcohol to my own child in my home, in my presence, if the child is 18, 19, or 20. What about my 16-year-old? What if I want to enjoy a glass of wine with my 16-year-old?
16-year-old, then you're getting into the area of contributing to the delinquency of a juvenile. There's a gray area at 17 as to whether or not 17-year-olds fall in. The law is clear that under 17, which would include your 16-year-old, if you allow them to drink, you're then going to be technically considered contributing to the delinquency of a minor, because you're in violation of state statute and the East Baton Rouge Parish ordinance I just referred to that limits it to 18. So, no, you can't do that.
And you've talked to us and cleared up for us, thank you, the criminal consequences for providing alcohol to underage persons. What about civil consequences? Could I be sued for underage drinking?
Well, as a parent you're talking about?
Yes.
The biggest consequence, and where the issue probably comes up the most, is the question you previously posed about hosting a party and having underage drinkers other than your son or daughter present. A lot of people hear about Louisiana's dram shop acts that are somewhat of a limitation of liability, almost a immunity statute for commercial establishments and social hosts who either sell, serve, or furnish alcoholic beverages, that the person who consumes, if they leave and cause injury or damage because of their intoxication, there's an immunity from liability to that commercial establishment and or that social host. But that statute is very specific. It says providing alcoholic beverages to persons of legal drinking age. That goes out the window with underage drinking. You have no immunity, there's no limitation of liability. You can be sued if you serve alcohol to a minor who leaves your residence, gets in an accident, and either injures himself or injures someone else. You can be held civilly liable for that. And I know most people have homeowners insurance, and the first thing that the average parent's going to do is, if that situation arises, is going to make that phone call to their homeowner insurer to say, I've had a claim made against us, I want you to come in and defend us, and we have insurance coverage. First thing the insurer is going to do is going to point out the exclusion portion of that policy. Specific exclusions for intentional acts and for acts caused by criminal activity. And jurisprudence is clear. You provide alcohol to minors, in addition to it being a criminal act, it's considered an intentional act. And what the insurer is going to tell you is, we don't cover you for this. Likewise, we're now starting to see, and I had the first case in my court just a couple of weeks ago, automobile policies with those same exclusions that says they will not cover any damage, personal injury caused by a criminal act or an intentional act. And driving while intoxicated is going to be considered a criminal act. That you're engaged in the commission of a crime. When this accident occurs, they'll have a legal basis to exclude coverage on your liability policy for your automobile.
So parents can be held both criminally
and civilly liable. They can serve time and get hit in the pocketbook, both.
I think most folks are very aware now of the dangers, the acute danger of underage drinking, and that is having a young person get behind the wheel of a vehicle or get in the car with someone who's been drinking. But what sorts of social harms are there, in addition to traffic crashes, that young people face when they begin drinking before age 21?
Well, we know big one is decision making. You know, we know with young people, we're already concerned about the decisions, about their decision making ability and their ability to judge, make judgments. And alcohol does not increase that ability. It does just the opposite. And so things like date rape, and there was a recent article I read where it's interesting that some of the rates we're seeing now, where we used to blame date rape on substances put into a drink, we're actually finding now that alcohol is being looked at as a primary date rape type drug, because many times these things happen with people who are under the influence. And so parents have to remember again that as a parent, you want your child to make the best decision, and you want to teach them to make the best decision, and they can do that better when they're not intoxicated, when they're not under the influence.
I've also read that in cases of young people being involved in violent crimes, Judge Morvant, either as the victim or the perpetrator, that oftentimes alcohol is a factor. Do you see that?
I would venture to guess probably about 80 to 85% of the crimes we see somehow involve either alcohol or other drugs. It's a factor, either the motivating factor for committing the crime, or the crime was committed while under the influence of either drugs or alcohol. It's very, very prevalent in the criminal justice system.
Probably the crime that we all associate the most with drinking is drunk driving. And so Donna Tate, State Executive Director of MAD, is here and can talk to us a little bit about some of the statistics involving young people. How big of a problem is it when you look at drunk driving numbers in our state? And what do you see on your end?
About half of our fatalities on the roadways are caused by alcohol-related crashes. And in our driver population, the 15 to 20-year-olds represent about 7.6% of our licensed drivers, but they represent 13% of our alcohol-related traffic fatalities. So it's really disproportionate to the number of drivers that are on the road in that age group as opposed to the number of crashes that actually take place. The 18 to 20-year-olds are particularly of interest because their crash rate in alcohol-related crashes is twice that of the average driver.
So we're dealing basically with people who are still new at driving, because it does take several years to get very skilled at that, and new at drinking, and certainly taking in a substance that's affecting their brain differently than it would an adult, which is something we'll talk to Dr. Cataldi about in a minute. Isn't the legal limit for intoxication different for young people as compared to adults?
Absolutely. In Louisiana, .08 is the legal limit for adults over 21. Under 21, we have a zero tolerance law, so if you are impaired at .02 or above, then you are actually considered drunk if you're under 21, if you're behind the wheel operating a car.
And .02 is just a very small measurable amount of alcohol.
Absolutely.
So if they've even had less than a drink, that would be something that would show up on the blood alcohol test. That's very interesting. Well, you know, we hear a lot about this 18-year-old versus 21-year-old drinking age, and of course it was at one time 18 and was raised in the mid-90s in Louisiana to 21. But so many people, especially in this day and age when we have young people serving our country overseas, are concerned that while we allow 18, 19, and 20-year-olds to fight for our country and indeed lay down their lives for our country, when they come home, we're not allowing them to drink. How do you defend the 21-year-old drinking age against that argument?
Well, it's a very popular argument, and I always start by saying that the Pentagon has been a long time one of the strongest advocates for the minimum drinking age being 21. Prior to that being mandatory across the nation, they lost nearly a battalion of troops every year to drunk driving, and where their leadership is not advocating for it, it's a strong argument against making that change. Additionally, when you look at it, we have lots of rites and rites of passage that occur at different ages, and they're set there because there are developmental milestones, there are intellectual readiness points of development for people, and there's a rationale and a logic behind it, a science behind it, if you will. So when you look at the minimum drinking age law, brain development is the primary focus behind that. One, you want to be intellectually ready, and many people don't know their brains continue to develop until their mid-20s. And the key parts of the brain that control reasoning and memory and your judgment, your inhibitions, are the last to mature. So you're still growing and developing between that 18 to 20-year-old period, and you're not really developmentally or intellectually ready for the implications of that. It can have permanent consequences to your development.
Well, maybe we could help our young people be ready by teaching them to drink responsibly. I know I've often heard it said that in Europe, where parents have their children drinking wine with the family as part of the meal from a very early age, that those parents have indeed taught their children how to drink responsibly, and that they really have a more realistic approach in the European countries than we do. What would you say to that argument?
Well, that's another good myth, and unfortunately the myths are a lot more popular than the facts sometimes. In 2003, the European did a study across Europe's different nations, and it was the 2003 European School Survey Project on alcohol and drugs. And what they found was that most European countries, young people had much higher intoxication rates than they do in the United States, and less than 25% had lower or equivalent intoxication rates as compared to the United States. Additionally, they had a significantly higher proportion of students who reported binge drinking on a regular basis than compared to their U.S. counterparts. So clearly, that may be a more common practice, but it is certainly not a fact that they are more responsible drinkers. Europe certainly has a significant problem with youth alcohol use and abuse.